Everything is very tense. The potential for things to tip over into violence is very high. We've seen the absolute desperation in Kabul, people trying to flee the country, clinging to the wheels of planes, in some cases falling from them. That speaks very clearly to how frightened people are of what Taliban rule will bring, that they're really willing to risk their lives in such very extreme ways to get out of the country. The past 2 weeks in Afghanistan have been extraordinary. The Taliban have gone from controlling no cities to controlling the entire country. There became this drumbeat of cities would fall day by day. Kandahar in southern Afghanistan, Herat in the west, Mazar-e Sharif, the major city in the north. Even then, nobody anticipated that Kabul too would be gone in 24 hours. Just before the 20th anniversary of 9/11, the Taliban are declaring victory. The American diplomats are burning documents in the embassy and taking helicopter airlifts out to the airport. The collapse of Afghanistan is not the result of things that happened just in the last year or couple of years. They're the result of 20 years of missteps in how the West has run its war in Afghanistan.
By the end of 2014, Afghanistan will be fully secured by Afghans.
And how the Afghan government has conducted itself is also a result of Taliban persistency and, in the last few months, a very strategically effective military campaign.
Showing you, our viewers now, Rob, is images of the Afghan flag being taken down.
Even the Taliban's own leaders have admitted they didn't expect to be declaring victory so quickly. So many of the cities, like Kabul, fell with little or no fighting. They were handed over in deals between local leadership and Taliban commanders. In the final stages, it seems like the Taliban gained so much momentum that Afghan armed forces just seemed to lose their morale completely, and at some point Taliban victory seemed inevitable, and so people chose not to fight. The Taliban are a group that was born out of the Afghan civil war of the 1990s. They're fighting to establish an Islamic emirate. They want Afghanistan to be ruled by their interpretation of Sharia law. Particularly in the 1990s, that was extremely restrictive for women. They were barred from education, from most work. They were not allowed to leave the home without a male guardian. They were expected to wear a burqa at all times. There were a lot of restrictions on men too, on their clothing. They had to grow beards. They were required to pray 5 times a day. Their version of justice included punishments like stoning to death for adultery, floggings, amputation for theft. And the fear in Afghanistan is that many of those restrictions are going to return now they're back in power.
If you can't work, you can't talk, you can't go out, you can't define it as a life.
I have never felt it to this extent, helpless, hopeless, disappointed, poor and miserable in my life.
The Taliban have been trying to present themselves as a changed organisation, still very devout, still very committed to Islamic law, but not as hardline as they were. The problem is they've been very reluctant to spell out what that means. And what we have seen in areas where they've already taken control in Afghanistan is that they have brought in a lot of the restrictions or versions of the restrictions that were familiar from the last time they ruled Afghanistan. Parts of the country have been afflicted by terrible war. There's been awful civilian casualties, but there's also been millions of children who've been able to get an education, who've grown up in a country where they've been able to set up businesses, pursue careers, women have been able to work. Part of the Taliban's success as a government may be reliant on whether they are able to recognise that the Afghans who had a different vision for their country are a significant proportion of Afghans. There's a young, educated generation who broadly supported a democratic Afghanistan with extensive women's rights. One of the most urgent things is for Western countries to try and very belatedly make good on their promises to get the most vulnerable people out of Kabul, the people we're seeing mobbing the airport. Perhaps the Taliban will come true on their promises. Perhaps they will not harm people, but the future is still pretty bleak for women who are going to see restrictions on their ability to get an education, their ability to work, their freedom of movement. It's not clear what those restrictions will be, but I think it's certainly very clear that there will be many more restrictions on their lives than there are at present.